The premise: Dante Moretti is the fixer for the most powerful families in the city, a man whose shadow is more feared than the law. Elena Ricci is the daughter of a disgraced accountant who stole millions from the wrong people to save her father's life. Elena is handed over to Dante as collateral. She expects a dungeon. He gives her a throne made of thorns. Chapter 1: The Price of Air. The air in the back of the car was thick, with the scent of sandalwood and expensive gin. Elena sat as far away from the man in the shadows as the leather upholstery allowed. Outside, the city lights blurred into long, golden streaks, but inside, the world felt like it had narrowed down to the sound of Dante Moretti's breathing. "You're shaking, Elena," he said. His voice was a low, melodic grate, like velvet over gravel. "You would be too, if you were being sold like a piece of livestock," she snapped, her eyes flashing despite the terror pooling in her stomach. Dante shifted, leaning into the dim light of the cabin. His face was a masterpiece of harsh angles and cold intent. He didn't look like a man who felt things. He looked like a man who calculated them. "You weren't sold," he corrected, his eyes dark as midnight, oil roving over her face with a clinical intensity that made her skin itch. "You were traded. Your father valued his skin more than your soul. I simply agreed to the exchange." He reached out, his gloved hand catching her chin. He didn't squeeze, but the weight of his palm felt like a brand. "From this moment, you don't belong to the Ricci name. You don't belong to the law. You belong to the debt. And I am the collector." A future scene. The Gala of Ghosts. Dante stood behind her, his hands resting on her hips as she stared at herself in the mirror. She was wearing a dress the color of fresh blood, and a diamond collar that was too heavy to be just jewelry. "Everyone will be looking at me tonight," she whispered, her reflection pale against his black suit. Dante leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Let them look. Let them see what happens when I find something I like. They'll see the diamonds, Elena, but they'll also see the way I look at you, and they'll know that if they even breathe your air, I'll bury them where the light never reaches." He turned her around, his grip tightening just enough to remind her who was in control. "Smile for me, little bird. Show them how much you love your cage." Chapter 2: The Museum of Her. The Moretti estate was a labyrinth of cold stone and high-definition security. Elena was led not to a cell, but to a wing of the house that smelled faintly of jasmine and old books, scent so familiar it made her dizzy. Dante stopped before a set of heavy mahogany doors. He didn't use a key. He used his thumbprint. The lock clicked with a finality that echoed in the quiet hallway. "Go in," he commanded, his voice a low vibration against the back of her neck. Elena pushed the doors open and froze, her breath hitched, trapped in a throat that had gone bone dry. The collection. It wasn't a bedroom. It was a shrine. Along the far wall stood the bookshelf from her childhood home, the one she thought had been lost in the repossession 3 years ago. Every book was there, arranged in the exact chaotic order she preferred. Poetry next to forensic textbooks. In the corner sat her velvet armchair, the one with the frayed left arm where she used to sit and study. Even the bedside lamp with the cracked base was there, casting a warm, honeyed glow over a room that shouldn't exist. "Foul," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she brushed the spine of a worn copy of Wuthering Heights. "I've been buying your life back, piece by piece, for 5 years," Dante said, stepping into the room. He didn't look at the furniture. He only looked at her. "Every time your father gambled away a piece of your history, I was the one who bought it. Every time a creditor came for your things, they found a check already waiting for them. The evidence of obsession." Elena spun around, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and dawning horror. "You weren't just watching me. You were harvesting me." Dante crossed the room, his presence shrinking the space, until she was backed against the very bookshelf he had stolen back for her. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, before his fingers tangled in her hair, forcing her to look up at him. "I watched you grow up in a house that didn't deserve you," he murmured, his gray eyes darkening to the color of a storm-tossed sea. "I watched you mourn things you thought were gone forever. I kept them safe. I kept you safe, even when you didn't know I existed." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "This isn't just a room, Elena. It's the only place in this world where I allow myself to be human. And now you're finally in it. The discovery. Felina pulled away, her heart hammering. She noticed a glass display case on the vanity. Inside, pinned to a velvet cushion, was a single, dried carnation. "That's from my graduation," she gasped. "I dropped it in the parking lot. I thought it was swept away." "I followed you that day," Dante confessed, his voice devoid of shame. "I watched you walk across that stage, and I knew then that I would never let another man touch the hand that held that flower. You were never going to marry that boy you were dating. You were never going to leave this city. You were always going to end up here." Elena looked at the room her room and realized the terrifying truth. Dante Moretti hadn't just taken her as collateral for a debt. He had built a museum of her life, and now he had finally collected the centerpiece. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. The weight of the room was suffocating. Every object was a tether, a reminder that while she had been living her life, Dante Moretti had been cataloging it like a scientist dissecting a rare species. He didn't just own her future, he had stolen her past. Dante stood by the door, watching her with a terrifyingly calm satisfaction. He looked like a man who had finally put the last piece of a 1,000-piece puzzle into place. "You look overwhelmed," he murmured. "Sit. Use your chair. I had the velvet professionally cleaned, but I made sure they didn't fix the frayed arm. I know you like to pull at the threads when you're thinking." The casualness of his knowledge snapped something inside her. The fear that had been keeping her frozen evaporated, replaced by a white-hot jagged rage, the act of defiance. Elena's eyes darted to the vanity, to the glass case, to the dried carnation, the symbol of her most innocent day. The day she thought she had a future that didn't involve men like him. "You think, because you kept these things, you kept me," she hissed. "I know I did," he replied, his voice a low, steady thrum. In a blurred movement, Elena grabbed a heavy brass bookend from the shelf gift from her mother and swung it with everything she had. Crack. The glass of the display case shattered, spiderwebbing into 1,000 glittering shards. She didn't stop. She reached into the wreckage, her fingers slicing open on the glass, and snatched the dried flower. With a guttural cry, she crushed the brittle petals into dust, letting the gray remnants flutter to the floor. "There," she panted, her chest heaving, blood dripping from her palm onto the cream-colored rug. "It's gone. You can't have it anymore." The aftermath. She expected him to roar. She expected him to strike her, or at least to mourn the artifact he had spent years protecting. Instead, Dante didn't move. His expression didn't change, but the air in the room suddenly felt like it was being sucked out of a vacuum. He walked toward her, his footsteps slow and rhythmic. He didn't look at the ruined flower or the broken glass. He looked at the blood blooming on her hand. He stopped inches from her, his shadow swallowing her. He took her injured hand in his. His grip was firm, inescapable, but his touch was hauntingly light as he inspected the cuts. "Do you feel better now?" he asked. The lack of anger in his voice was more terrifying than a scream. "I hate you," she whispered, trying to jerk her hand away. He didn't let go. "I know," he said. He brought her bleeding palm to his lips, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't kiss the wound. He simply breathed against it, his warmth a sickening contrast to the coldness of his words. "You think you destroyed something, but all you did was prove how much power I have over your emotions." He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "You can burn this entire room to ash. Felina, you can break every book and tear every thread. It won't change the fact that at the end of the night, when the fire goes out, you'll still be standing in the dark with me, and I'll just buy you new things, better things, things that only have our history attached to them." He pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket and began to wrap her hand, his movements methodical and tender. "Every time you break something of yours," he whispered, tightening the silk until she winced, "I will replace it with something of mine. By the time you're finished throwing your tantrum, there won't be a single piece of Elena Ricci left in this house. There will only be what I allow you to be." Chapter 4. The Gaslight Mirror. Felina woke to a room flooded with soft, artificial sunlight. Her head throbbed, and for a moment, the memory of the previous night felt like a fever dream. The jagged glass, the metallic scent of her own blood, and the terrifying weight of Dante's lips against her palm. She sat up, her eyes immediately darting to the vanity. Her breath hitched. She scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the plush rug. The impossible restoration. The display case was there. The glass was pristine, without a single hairline fracture or thumbprint. And inside, resting on the same velvet cushion, was the carnation. It wasn't just a similar flower, it was the flower. She could see the tiny, distinctive tear on the bottom petal she had noticed years ago, but she had crushed it. She had felt it crumble into dust between her fingers. She spun around. The brass bookend she had used as a weapon was back on the shelf, holding up her poetry books. There was no blood on the rug, no scent of ozone or rage. "It didn't happen," she whispered, her voice cracking. I know I broke it." She looked at her hand. It was wrapped in a fresh, white medical bandage. The sharp sting beneath the gauze was the only evidence that reality hadn't folded in on itself. The architect of reality. The mahogany doors creaked open. Dante stood there, dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look like a shadow cast by the morning light. He held a silver tray with a single cup of coffee. "You're awake," he said, his voice as smooth as polished stone. "Did you sleep well? Where is the glass, Dante?" she demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the vanity. "I broke it. I crushed that flower. I saw it happen." Dante walked into the room, placing the coffee on the nightstand. He didn't even glance at the display case. "I don't know what you're talking about, Felina. You were quite tired when we arrived. Perhaps you had a nightmare." "A nightmare." She lunged toward him, grabbing his lapels. "You bandaged my hand. You saw me do it." Dante looked down at her hands on his chest. He didn't pull away. Instead, he reached up and gently uncurled her fingers. "You tripped in the hallway last night, Elena. You cut your hand on the doorframe. I cleaned it for you. You were delirious with exhaustion. The psychological siege." He leaned in close, his gray eyes void of any flicker of a lie. "It was a perfect, chilling performance. The room is exactly as it has always been," he murmured. "It is perfect, just like you." Elena backed away, her heart racing. He wasn't just gaslighting her. He was showing her the extent of his resources. To replace the glass, clean the rug, and somehow find or meticulously reconstruct a dead flower in less than 8 hours. It was a display of absolute power. He wasn't just her captor. He was the editor of her life. He could delete her actions as easily as he could delete her future. "You're a monster," she breathed. "I am the man who ensures your world remains beautiful," Dante corrected. He took a step toward her, his shadow stretching across the restored vanity. "Even if I have to protect you from yourself. Drink your coffee, Elena. Today, we begin your education on how to be a Moretti." Chapter 5. The Gilded Weapon. Dante didn't give her a choice of what to wear. On the bed lay a dress of liquid obsidian, so fine it felt like a second skin, and a pair of heels that looked like glass daggers. "Tonight, you aren't a debt, Felina," Dante said, watching her from the doorway as she finished dressing. "You are my shadow. You will sit at my right hand. You will listen to every word spoken, and you will say nothing. Your only job is to look like the woman who finally tamed the fixer." "I haven't tamed anything," she snapped, struggling with the clasp of a diamond choker that felt dangerously like a collar. Dante walked over, his large hands replacing her trembling ones. He clicked the clasp shut. "The world doesn't need to know the truth. They only need to see the image. In my world, perception is more lethal than a bullet." The Lion's Den. The meeting took place in the glass-walled penthouse of a downtown skyscraper. This wasn't a gathering of thugs. These were the clean monster senators, CEOs, and judges who used Dante to do the things their status wouldn't allow. As they entered, the room went silent. Every eye turned to Elena. She felt the heat of their stares, a mixture of envy and predatory curiosity. Dante's grip on her waist tightened, a possessive claim that broadcast a clear message: "Look, but don't touch." They sat at the head of a long mahogany table. Dante didn't introduce her. He simply pulled out her chair, and the meeting began. The lesson in power. For 2 hours, Elena watched a side of Dante she hadn't seen. He was cold, surgical, and utterly dominant. He didn't raise his voice, yet men twice his age sweated as he spoke. He was negotiating a land deal that would displace thousands, and he was doing it with the calm of a man ordering coffee. Halfway through, a man named Sterling, a rival fixer with a cruel, thin smile, leaned forward. "Quite a stunning piece of collateral you've acquired, Dante," Sterling said, his eyes raking over Elena with a disgusting familiarity. I heard Ricci's daughter was a spitfire. Does she bite? Or did you pull her teeth already? The air in the room froze. Elena felt Dante's hand, which had been resting casually on her thigh, go still. Elena, Dante said, his voice a low, terrifying purr. Sterling here thinks you're a prop. What do we do with men who talk about my business as if it were theirs? Elena caught her breath. This was the test. Dante wanted her to play the role. He wanted her to show the room that she was part of his darkness. She looked at Sterling, channeling every ounce of the rage she felt toward Dante, and redirecting it at the man across the table. In my experience, Elena said, her voice steady and chillingly sweet, men who focus on the teeth of others usually forget to guard their own throats. Isn't that right, Dante? The aftermath. A slow, dark chuckle escaped Dante. Sterling's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. The rest of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Precisely, Dante murmured. When the meeting ended and they were back in the elevator, the doors had barely closed before Dante shoved her against the mirrored wall. He didn't look angry, he looked electrified. You were perfect, he whispered, his hands pinning her wrists above her head. The way you looked at him, you looked like a Moretti. I am nothing like you, she panted, though her pulse was racing for a different reason now. Liar, he said, leaning in until their lips were a hair's breadth apart. You enjoyed the power. You enjoyed seeing that man crawl because of a single word from your mouth. You're beginning to realize that the cage I built for you is actually a fortress, and everyone outside it is beneath us. He didn't kiss her. He simply held her there, forced to look at their reflection in the mirror, the Dark King, and his newly crowned queen, both stained by the same shadow. Chapter 6. The enemy of my enemy. The adrenaline from the boardroom meeting hadn't faded. It had curdled into a cold, calculating desperation. Elena realized that as long as she was seen as Dante's shadow queen, the world would fear Urbit. Sterling didn't fear her. He hated Dante enough to be reckless. Dante was in a rare mood of dark contentment. He took her to an exclusive, dimly lit lounge after the meeting to celebrate her performance. The air was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and jazz. I need to go to the powder room, Elena whispered, keeping her voice even. Dante's eyes tracked her for a long second, his thumb tracing the pulse at her wrist. Don't be long, Elena. I find I don't like the air as much when you aren't breathing it. The handoff. Elena didn't go to the powder room. She knew Sterling was holding court in the VIP alcove near the back. She had managed to snag a heavy silver pen and a cocktail napkin from the bar, while Dante was distracted by the Mater D. She leaned against the marble pillar near Sterling's table, her back to him. With trembling hands, she scribbled for words on the napkin. He is not invincible. Help. As she walked past his table, she intentionally stumbled. Sterling's hand shot out to steady her elbow, a touch that made her skin crawl. But it was the opening she needed. Careful, Mrs. Moretti, he sneered, his eyes flicking to the diamond collar around her neck. Wouldn't want you to scuff the fixer's favorite toy. She didn't speak. She simply pressed the crumpled napkin into his palm as she pulled away. She saw the moment. His fingers closed around it, his expression shifting from mockery to sharp, predatory interest. The return to the cage. When she returned to the table, Dante was standing, his coat already on. The warmth from before was gone, replaced by a terrifying still tension. The powder room is to the left. Elena, he said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. You went to the right. Her heart skipped a beat. I got turned around. It's dark in here. Dante stepped into her personal space, his hand coming up to tilt her chin back. He leaned down, inhaling the scent of her hair. You smell like Sterling's cigars. He was standing in the walkway. She lied, her eyes locked on his. He tried to touch me. I walked away. Dante's grip on her chin tightened just enough to be a warning. He looked toward the back of the lounge where Sterling sat. Sterling raised a glass in their direction, a smirk playing on his thin lips. If he touched you, Dante whispered, I'll peel the skin from his fingers. But if you went to him, he trailed off, his gray eyes turning to ice. Then, I'll have to remind you why you were traded to me and not to a man like him. The silent war. The drive back to the estate was silent. Elena sat with her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing. She had planted a seed. But Sterling wasn't a hero. He was a shark. If he helped her escape, it would only be to use her as leverage against Dante or to keep her for himself. As they reached the estate, Dante didn't lead her to the museum bedroom. He led her to his private study, the room where the real blood was spilled. He sat behind his desk and pulled out a tablet. He swiped across the screen, and Elena's blood ran cold. It was high-definition footage of the lounge. It showed her scribbling on the napkin. It showed the handoff. "You think I would take you anywhere without eyes on you?" Dante asked softly. He stood up and walked toward her, holding a small silver device that looked like a remote. "I was waiting for you to tell me. I wanted you to choose me, but you chose the one man who hates me more than you do." He pressed a button on the remote. A low, sharp hum echoed from the diamond collar around her neck. It wasn't a shock, but it was a vibration that felt like it was rattling her very bones. "Sterling won't save you, Elena," Dante said, standing so close she could feel the heat of his rage. "Because by the time he arrives at the location you gave him, he'll find my men waiting. And you're going to watch what happens when someone tries to steal what belongs to me." Chapter 7. The Ghost of a Home. Dante didn't scream. He didn't even raise his hand. That was the terror of him. He didn't use violence when he could use the truth. He simply led her back to the car, his grip on her arm like a manacle. "You want to go back to your old life, Elena?" he asked, his voice a calm, chilling whisper as the car sped through the rain-slicked streets. "Do you want to be the daughter of the man you tried so hard to protect? Let's see what that life looks like without my interference." The ruin. They pulled up to the modest suburban house where Elena had grown up, but it wasn't the house she remembered. The lawn was overgrown, choked with weeds. The windows were boarded up with cheap plywood, and the front door hung off its hinges. There was no jasmine in the air. Here only the smell of damp rot and stagnant trash. "Go on," Dante said, releasing her arm. "He's inside." Elena stepped out of the car, her glass dagger heels sinking into the mud. She pushed past the broken door. The interior was a nightmare. Her mother's fine china was smashed on the floor. The walls were stripped of copper wiring. In the center of the living room, sitting on a stained mattress surrounded by empty bottles and gambling stubs, was her father. He looked 20 years older. His skin was sallow, his eyes vacant. "Dad," she whispered. The man looked up, but there was no spark of recognition, only a frantic, pathetic greed. "Elena, you have more. Did Moretti give you more?" "I need it. I have a system. I just need one more buy-in." The revelation. Dante stepped into the room, his expensive suit a jarring contrast to the filth. He didn't look disgusted. He looked bored. "He didn't miss you, Elena," Dante said, stepping over a pile of trash. "The moment the debt was settled, he didn't ask where I was taking you. He didn't ask if you'd be safe. He asked if I could lend him another 50,000. "That's a lie," she choked out. Dante pulled a small voice recorder from his pocket and pressed play. Dante's voice. "She's collateral. Ricci, you understand? She belongs to me now. You won't see her again." Her father's voice. Yeah, whatever. Just the interest on the other loan. You'll freeze it. And I heard there's a game at the docks tonight. Can you get me in?" The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was more painful than a physical blow. Her father didn't even look ashamed. He was busy searching through a pile of rags for a dropped cigarette. The shackles of choice. Dante walked over to her, standing behind her, as she stared at the shell of the man who had raised her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs tracing the line of her collarbone. "Sterling would have brought you back here, Elena, or worse. He would have let you rot in a place like this, once he was done using you to hurt me. Is this the freedom you wanted? To be a pawn for a man who would sell your soul for a seat at a poker table?" Elena felt the last of her resistance crumble. The anger that had fueled her message to Sterling turned into a cold, hollow void. "I have no one," she whispered. "You have me," Dante replied. He turned her around, forcing her to look at him. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were burning with a dark, triumphant possessiveness. "I am the only one who values you. I am the only one who keeps the walls from caving in on you. I am your father, your mother, your God, and your jailer." He leaned down, his lips grazing her forehead. "Now tell me, do you want to stay here in the dirt with him, or do you want to come home?" Elena looked at her father, who was now begging Dante for a light. Then She looked at the man who had systematically destroyed her life, just so he could be the one to rebuild it. "Take me home," she whispered. "Good girl," Dante murmured. He picked her up, her silk dress trailing through the dust of her old life, and carried her back to the obsidian sedan. As the car pulled away, Elena didn't look back at the house. She looked at Dante, and for the first time, she didn't see a monster. She saw her entire world. Chapter 8. The Architect's Hand. The surrender was total. For weeks, Elena lived in a state of quiet, haunting gratitude. She let Dante dress her. She let him feed her, and she let him lead her through the cold, glittering halls of his world. She believed he was her savior, because he was the only one who hadn't abandoned her. But the ghost of her father's vacant eyes kept her awake at night. She needed to understand how a man could fall so far, so fast. The paper trail. Dante was at the docks, overseeing a shipment. He had left Elena at the estate, confident that her spirit was finally broken. He had even stopped locking the doors to his private study, a sign of his absolute victory. Elena entered the room, the scent of his expensive gin and leather clinging to the air. She sat at his desk, her fingers trembling, as she pulled open the bottom drawer, the one he always touched before they left the house. Behind a false back in the drawer, she found a ledger. It wasn't encrypted. It was as if he wanted her to find it, or perhaps he simply believed she never would. She flipped to the most recent page. Her heart stopped. Project. Collateral Ricci. October 14th. Payment to Arthur Ricci. $100,000 requirement. Sell the jasmine plants and ignore daughter's calls. November 3rd. Payment to Arthur Ricci. $250,000. Requirement. Vacate family home. Relocate to designated safe house. 4 inches. The slum. December 1st. Performance bonus. $50,000. Requirement. Act incoherent. Greedy during daughter's visit. Note. Ensure he mentions the system. The performance of a lifetime. The room felt like it was spinning. Her father hadn't been a victim of his own vices. He had been a hired actor. Dante hadn't found her father in the dirt. He had placed him there. Every tear she had shed, every ounce of guilt she had felt for leaving him, had been choreographed by the man who claimed to love her. The ledger is quite thorough, isn't it? Dante was leaning against the doorframe. He hadn't made a sound. He looked at her with a terrifyingly calm curiosity, as if he were watching a butterfly beat its wings against a glass jar. "You paid him," she whispered, the paper crinkling in her grip. "You paid my father to act like a monster, so I would think you were a god." The dark truth. Dante walked toward her, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic. He didn't look ashamed. He looked proud. "I didn't pay him to act like a monster, Elena," Dante said, stopping in front of the desk. "I paid him to show you who he truly was. A man who loved you wouldn't have taken the first 100,000. He would have fought for you. But Arthur, he negotiated. He asked for a higher performance bonus, to mention the gambling." He leaned over the desk, his face inches from hers. "I didn't create the rot in his soul, my love. I just gave him the stage to perform it for you. You destroyed my family," she sobbed, clutching the ledge. "I gave you a better one," he countered. He reached out, his hand covering hers on the ledger. "I cleared the weeds so you could see the soil. You were living in a lie made of jasmine and childhood memories. I gave you the truth, that in this world, only one person is willing to pay any price to keep you. Only one person is willing to burn down your entire history just to be your future. The choice of the shadow." He walked around the desk and pulled her to her feet. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the same gesture from the night he took her from the rain. "Now, you know everything," he whispered. "You know that I am the architect of your misery and your sanctuary. You know that I bought your father's betrayal. And you know that I would do it again tomorrow, if it meant you stayed exactly where you are." He tilted her head back, his eyes searching hers for the spark of rebellion. "What are you going to do, Elena? Run back to the man who sold you for a bonus? Or stay with the man who would pay the world to keep you?" Elena looked at the ledger, then at the man holding her. The horror was there, but beneath it was something darker, a twisted realization that she belonged to him, not because of a debt, but because he was the only thing left in her universe. She didn't pull away. She leaned her forehead against his chest, her fingers clutching his silk tie. "I hate you," she whispered into his heart. "I know," Dante replied, his arms wrapping around her in a grip that felt like both a hug and a cage. But you're mine, and that is the only truth that will never change. The final evolution. Elena finally understands that Silas Dante isn't just a man. He is an environment. There is no escaping him, because he has replaced her entire reality with himself. They remain there, suspended in a reality where the line between love and total subjugation has vanished entirely. Dante sits in his high-backed leather chair, the king of a city built on secrets, while Elena stands by the window, watching the rain strike the glass. She no longer looks for a way out. She only watches the reflections, the way the light hits the diamond collar he bought her, and the way his shadow always seems to overlap with hers. The museum of her life is now complete. Every piece of her past has been curated, bought, or destroyed by his hand. They are two ghosts, haunting a palace of their own making, bound by a bond that is as unbreakable as it is toxic. A final perspective in the world of dark romance. Elena's ending isn't a tragedy of loss, but a tragedy of integration. She didn't lose herself. She was consumed. And as she turns away from the window to meet Dante's gaze, the look in her eyes isn't fear anymore, it's a cold, hard recognition. She has become the only thing capable of living in his world, the queen of the Obsidian Empire. The end.